Excellencies, distinguished guests, 2025 is a very significant year, and we could be at a turning point. Mr. Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. The United States is the largest and most powerful economy in the world, with the most powerful military in the world. What it chooses to do or not do will have major global consequences. What policies will President Trump usher in his second administration? Candidate Trump promised on his campaign trail radical changes in domestic governance and a major hike in trade tariffs. After he was elected in his transition, he has made statements about getting back Panama Canal and buying Greenland and teasing Canada about being the 51st state of the United States. So what disruption and transformation will we see? Will we see an end to the two wars that are going on, the Ukraine war and the expanding Middle East conflict triggered by the Hamas horrific attack on Israel and the unfolding tragic Gaza war waged by Israel? Will there be a remaking of the Middle East? Will the global trading system, as we know it, be totally disrupted? And where is the US-China relationship heading? But more importantly, what will the impact of these developments be on ASEAN? Now, in the many writings that have been published, analysts speak of emerging multipolarity, that middle and small powers have gained a sense of agency to shape their own future, to serve their country's interests. ASEAN has come out reasonably well in the competition between the United States and China so far. Can we continue on this path? And how can ASEAN countries work with the United States to overcome the America First economic policies and security policies? And can ASEAN countries negotiate with China to work out South China Sea issues to avoid conflict in the waters? Can ASEAN countries strengthen the regional grouping to advance their collective interests? And can ASEAN work with others to deal with climate change, which is a major concern of the regional countries? To address some of these questions, we have the right person to give us his take on the geopolitics and geoeconomics of our region. Our keynote speaker of the Regional Forum of 2025, Regional Outlook Forum, is Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, Enrique Manalo. Secretary Manalo is a seasoned diplomat. He has had a long, distinguished career in the Foreign Service of the Republic of the Philippines. Before becoming Foreign Secretary, he has been Undersecretary of Policy of the Philippines, Foreign Ministry twice, and advisor to the Foreign Secretary. And he has been a senior official at ASEAN SOM, so he knows well how ASEAN, what he can get out of ASEAN, and what are the limits. He served as the Philippines' permanent representative to the UN, an ambassador to the United Kingdom and Belgium. Secretary Manalo will address the topic, "Can the spirit of cooperation shine through turbulent times?" Secretary Manalo, can you please step up?
Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, I first wish to thank the Yusof Ishak Institute, or ISEAS, for the very kind invitation to speak before you this morning. I also wish to acknowledge and thank Director and CEO, Mr. Choi Shing-kwok, and also for the kind introduction, my friend, Professor Heng Chee. As stated, I've been asked to speak on a fairly broad and complex theme. Can the spirit of cooperation shine amidst turbulent times? So my answer can only be very simple. Not only is it yes, but also it does and it must. So to begin, first I'd like to examine an assumption that permeates conversations, especially in the region nowadays, namely strategic competition, especially between the United States and China, has sharpened polarities and constraints to an extent that states are less able or unwilling to cooperate substantively. And we might also add to this the situations in the ongoing conflict in the Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, and of course some other issues. So while this assumption may be valid to an extent, I believe it is essentially flawed, as it is hinged on the mentality of the Cold War, perhaps our nearest experience of a bipolar rivalry. But as President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. pointed out in his keynote speech at Shangri-La last year, this Cold War prism is outdated. The future of the region, if not the world, is not being set by one or two powers, but by many actors. And I think we deal with a distinctly different global landscape in the 21st century. More than at any point in history, we see many states actively shaping the regional and global agenda. States, some of them yet to be decolonized in the 1960s, have assumed ownership for the solutions for the problems of our time. With such agency, they are succeeding in bringing forth new conversations about resilience, sustainability, and transformation in the light of their respective realities. Thus, we see the emergence of new modes of cooperation and expressions of common purpose. Take, for example, ASEAN, the Pacific Island Forum, the African Union, and CARICOM. In the United Nations, small island states and climate-vulnerable states have cut fresh pathways for global solidarity on climate change and action. Last year, the ICJ commenced a process to issue an advisory opinion on the obligations of states in climate change. And last September, high-level debates were held in the United Nations on the issue of sea level rise for the first time, both at the instance of UNGA resolutions initiated by island states. Moreover, a wave of South-South cooperation has flourished in the past decade by states of similar development tracks to address shared policy challenges. India, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, among others, have established new development cooperation models outside the funding streams of the West. The United Nations development system has reason to support this trend, not only because it achieves more impact, but because it's rooted in relatable context and experience. Last November, for example, the Philippines launched an initiative for sustainable health resources in the Pacific region. It is cooperation that delivers on public goods and at the center of resilient societies, mainly health systems. Global and regional cooperation in new fronts on new platforms are actually thriving, notwithstanding major power rivalries, simply because problems confronting many societies and nations are beyond their capacity to address individually and are well outside the big power rivalries. Nor is the toolbox for many challenges of our times in the hands of the major powers. The toolbox or toolboxes are being fashioned in the halls of multilateralism, built in the 20th century, as well as new corridors of engagement that have sprung out of and alongside multilateral processes. The United Nations, which marks its 80th anniversary this year, stands as an enduring edifice of common purpose. Despite its deficiencies, there is no alternative, for it is a platform that is needed to address global challenges. The UN Charter fosters the spirit of cooperation in an international order governed by international law and the principles of equity and of justice. And even as the UN strains under the weight of geopolitics and differences among the big powers, as well as conflicts, the UN is at the heart of global cooperation and shall continue to be so. It is true many see the UN as an imperfect vessel for the human community as we navigate especially the crises of our time. But without the UN, the catastrophes would be far more devastating. Our communities unable to cope adequately in the face of man-made and natural disasters. The UN, through cooperation of its member states, has succeeded in strengthening international law, promoting human rights, dealing with health and natural emergencies, and undertaking peacekeeping operations throughout the world, just to name some. And as one of the 51 founding members of the UN, one of the 3 in Asia, together with China and India, the Philippines has engaged actively to make the UN and its mechanisms robust, inclusive, and effective. Like the UN, the ASEAN symbolizes the triumph of the will of states for peace and cooperation. Almost 6 decades since its establishment, ASEAN has become a major regional fulcrum that has weathered tides of crises and change, resolute to pursue a stable, predictable, and rules-based environment that has allowed its populations to rise in prosperity. It remains the most viable regional organization in Asia. Its constructive and inclusive process, complemented by the depth and breadth of its dialogue partnerships, continue to promote various types of cooperation and dialogue among its members and with its external partners. ASEAN's mechanisms, including the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit, provide the only functional hub of engagement for states in the region, ASEAN and its partners alike. So if ASEAN is stronger than it was created in 1967, and it is undoubtedly stronger, then it is more than ever in a position to drive more dialogue and collaboration in Asia. ASEAN was born during the Cold War era. It nevertheless configured a direction for the future of the region in those years. And it can continue being that beacon for cooperation as we journey into the 21st century. But of course, this is not a given. ASEAN is a work in progress. It must continue making decisive calls and implementing far-seeing measures in order to sustain its centrality in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, what I've been saying is basically my premise. Cooperation is still the dominant leitmotif of the regional and global order. It is, and it has to be so. And I've spoken so far about its salient features of our time, when global unrest creates the need for further cooperation. However, cooperation should be underpinned by the following if it is to flourish further. First, new challenges pose unprecedented uncertainties, hence the need to be open for innovating modes of working together in search of new solutions for new problems on the basis of international law. Second, drivers of global action are no longer just the major countries. New actors are at the table, directing the discourse and setting paradigms for cooperation that are closer to their context. Third, institutions that have embedded and enriched habits of cooperation amongst nations for decades are assets in times of flux. They are the stewards of shared values, and they must evolve if they are to bridge the past with the future amidst change. Ladies and gentlemen, these times of global unrest behoove our region, the Asia-Pacific, to fulfill its promise as the engine of global growth for this century. And to this end, we must build for peace to sustain our economic growth trajectories, and secure the inclusive and empowerment of our citizens. For nearly six decades, ASEAN has been in the business of building peace. I have already spoken about its value earlier, and also its visionary and active centrality, which must prevail in the face of major power rivalries and common challenges. Building for peace in the Asia-Pacific requires a robust latticework of multilateral, regional, sub-regional, and bilateral dialogues, arrangements, partnerships, and initiatives. Even with the enduring relevance of ASEAN, there is no reason why other multilateral or regional dialogue or initiatives complementary to ASEAN or involving ASEAN with others should not be explored. We need to support the drivers of economic growth, invest in human capital, configure more resilient and integrated supply chains, strengthen connectivity and complementation. And an area of critical importance is the governance of the global commons, the spaces we co-inhabit, in particular, our maritime commons, for ours is a maritime region. Our seas and oceans connect our nations as a lifeline for the well-being of our economies and the future of millions of our coastal communities. Getting governance right in the maritime commons and applying the best of science, international law, and norms to manage them are key to maintaining peace in the region. As mentioned, a code of conduct, for example, on the South China Sea, strongly anchored on the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, can be that framework for managing disputes and sustaining cooperation in the South China Sea. In fact, discussions on a code of conduct for the South China Sea began almost 30 years ago. And developments such as the DOC in 2002 attest to the importance of those discussions. But now formal negotiations are being undertaken on a code of conduct, and they have been ongoing for about 5 or 6 years. And I think it is even more important now that ASEAN countries and China persevere in delivering a credible and effective code of conduct anchored on international law. And this is especially important because not only of the global significance of the South China Sea to international trade and commerce, but also due to the continuing disputes and tensions in the South China Sea. And also at the same time, actions against the lawful pursuits of countries such as the Philippines in our exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea, which are in accordance with UNCLOS and the arbitral award of 2016, have added even more urgency to this issue of the Code of Conduct. Maritime collaboration initiatives have also emerged in our region as well as in the Indian Ocean. Joint exercises and sails involving a number of states have become commonplace, each affirming the sense of responsibility of these states for regional peace and security. For its part, the Philippines has pursued trilateral collaboration with Indonesia and Malaysia in the Celebes Sea, and cooperative activities with the United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, France, India, and New Zealand in our exclusive economic zone. We have established new strategic partnerships with Japan, Vietnam, Australia, and South Korea. And a trilateral arrangement with the US and Japan has also been established. And at the same time, we are expanding cooperation with traditional partners such as the United States and the European Union. With regard to the United States, not only has cooperation increased in the area of defense, but also in the economic sphere. And this also applies especially to the EU, where, for example, we are now engaged in negotiations for a Philippine-EU free trade arrangement. So I believe some of these arrangements, which have been achieved or have been undertaken in a relatively short time, were responses to new challenges we all face in the region and globally. Ladies and gentlemen, we must also appreciate the context of these cooperation activities which I mentioned, not only in the strategic and defense-oriented security terms, but also to be viewed as ways of defining new byways for responsible shared stewardship for the purposes of economic resilience, energy and food security, the integrity of our ecosystems, climate and disaster risk resilience, and maritime cooperation. And especially because of the tensions and disputes in the South China Sea, it is incumbent upon the region's members to push the frontiers for possible maritime cooperation. We must promote confidence-building measures and cooperative activities along the lines of maritime domain awareness, freedom of navigation, marine environmental protection, safety of navigation and communication at sea, ocean governance, natural resource extraction and fisheries, with the law of the sea as our guide. And we should also not overlook outer space, a global common of fundamental importance to development and security in Asia, especially in terms of preventing an arms race in outer space and promoting equitable, peaceful uses of space-based technologies is important. I can also say the same for cyberspace, where we need rules not only to promote law, justice, access, and inclusion, but also to protect human dignity, human rights and freedoms, and the vulnerable from exploitation. For example, we have devised new means of cooperation in the face of inadequacy of existing mechanisms to prevent and stop human trafficking for cybercrime operations. ASEAN has risen and evolved in building the institutions of our community because of the changes and shifts in the regional and global landscape, not despite of them. And it is true, we live in a moment of complexities unseen prior to our time. But the world has always been in flux, change constant, the tides sometimes more turbulent than other times. So the contours of the unfolding horizon might be unfamiliar, but we are propelled by the same spirit of working together to address shared challenges. In the face of rapid change, we cooperate to achieve resilience, but we also seek to make our cooperation more resilient, for our institutions to withstand pressures of fragmentation and to thrive in the clarity of our common purpose. So while cooperation need not necessarily take the shape of formal organizations such as ASEAN, we must at the very least ensure that international law, as agreed, is faithfully complied with regardless of the challenging conditions which may prevail. We see in our region today the unfolding of a plethora of avenues for governments to pursue and/or protect their interests at various levels in response to increasing uncertainties and challenges. It is a conscious stepping up in response to the, quote, return of history. What is important from these cooperative endeavors is not necessarily complete consensus on every issue or action, but the commitment to work together and seek mutually beneficial outcomes. This is the logic of coalescing and sharing burdens, or in other words, the spirit of cooperation. So in the final analysis, I believe challenging or turbulent times, more often than not, compel states to seek cooperation with others. And the Philippines has also been consistent in this message, that if the international community is to be resilient amidst global winds of change, then the rules-based international order should underpin such cooperation. Through decades, the post-war architecture has demonstrated incredible resilience, allowing the international community through bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperative endeavors to weather global volatility. Our job as policymakers is to sustain these endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Manalo, for that very comprehensive survey of the areas of potential cooperation where you see, prospects and the light. And thank you for that very optimistic message and hopeful message of the ability to cooperate. I want to pick on one of the areas that you highlighted, which I think is not receiving very strong signals so far in all the reports we see. And it is the South-South collaboration you speak of. I think it is true in the last couple of years, and maybe is in reaction to what we see in the United States and in Europe, countries in the region, certainly in ASEAN, are looking to sign up free trade agreements, for instance, with global South countries, Thailand, Philippines, even Cambodia. And Singapore goes to Mercosur, we go to Turkey. It's new areas, where the South-South collaboration, we're trying to make that happen. In your view, do you think this is sustainable? Will it grow? Or is it just a false dawn and suddenly it dries up?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm still fairly optimistic that the potential for further South-South cooperation exists, and this cooperation can be not only perhaps in the economic area, purely economic, but in other areas as well. And I think this is because of the changing environment. I think more countries are now, many are now rising in prosperity. I think they see a greater need for their participation in decision making in the global arena, and this is best done through further cooperation on certain issues. And I cited some examples in the issue of climate change. For example, the Pacific Island states got together to work together for certain activities in the UN. And I think you have various conglomerations now taking active roles, for example, BRICS and other countries such as that. So I think these are all indicative of, I think, the growing need for countries from the South to assert themselves more. And the best way is to do it together rather than individually.
Thank you. Now, I know there are a lot of questions from the floor, and you are waiting to pose them to the Secretary. So can I take the first question from the floor? Over there, right at the end on my right side, table 52, I think.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Secretary Manalo. My name is Joanne, from the Senior Fellow at the Institute. I have a question regarding the South China Sea. I would like to hear your opinion on whether the Code of Conduct, once finalized, will truly be effective in helping the Philippines address your challenges with China. So I would like to hear your honest view on this matter. And also, secondly, the Philippines has recently enacted 2 laws, the Maritime Zone and the Sea Lane Acts. Do you think that this laws is going to affect other regional claimant states in the region, including Malaysia, and would it actually contribute to another hotspot or issue relating to this in the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Well, very quickly. Well, of course, it depends on the outcome of the Code of Conduct. What we want to have is an effective and substantive Code of Conduct, which would address, basic issues. And naturally, so it's difficult to answer that question until we really have an idea of what the code will look like. But what I can say, though, is that Negotiations have been going on for a number of years, but there are still some basic questions, fundamental questions, which have not yet really been fully addressed. These are the so-called milestone issues, pretty basic questions like what is the scope, what is the relationship of the code to the UNCLOS, what is its relationship to external parties, etc. These are issues which, of course, will have to be addressed. But our basic position is if we are satisfied that it's effective and substantive, then I suppose we would be content with that. On the maritime zones law, I mean, we're not the only country with such a law. And I think the important thing is the zones law does clarify many things for the Philippines and other countries. And so all countries have an idea about where our maritime zones lie. And I think that's the basic purpose of this law. And so I think that just as other countries have passed maritime zones bills, we have done the same. So I suppose once we all have clear ideas of where we stand, then we would have a clear basis if we have to undertake discussions to clarify certain points.
I think Joanne's question was, there would be conflicting claims, surely. Are these, issues already raised?
Yeah, well, there could be. And I think all countries would probably have the possibility to discuss them once we have a clear idea exactly what we are discussing about.
You mentioned about the importance of ASEAN and, that this is really still the beacon of hope. But you also mentioned about that it's a work in progress. We heard lately that the Philippines somehow is a bit disenchanted with ASEAN. It's probably showing less solidarity to the travails of the Philippines, as if this is being left alone. Is that such a feeling? And secondly, how would you want to reform ASEAN to make it much more effective and viable? Because ASEAN has faced a lot of criticisms that, maybe we are not as good as we used to be.
Well, I think I made it clear in my remarks. I have great optimism about ASEAN. And, I've been involved in ASEAN many times. And I think, as you know, each ASEAN country has sometimes their own view on certain issues, whatever they may be. And so the idea, in order to come up with a common ASEAN position, is to try to see how all positions can be amalgamated into any final ASEAN position or statement. So every country, it's a give and take issue, and that's how I believe ASEAN has survived and thrived for all these years, and I believe that's the way forward. However, that doesn't mean ASEAN is perfect. There are many issues that ASEAN has to resolve, even within our own region. We have issues such as, for example, Myanmar, which we have to address. We have economic issues. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is ASEAN shouldn't rest on its laurels. We have new challenges, and ASEAN has to have the ability to address them effectively. And we can only do that through a process of trial and error, negotiating, discussing, and then trying to find a way forward with the basic aim of ensuring that ASEAN maintains its relevance, its centrality. And I think we also have an important role to play on regional issues, especially using our various forums, such as the East Asia Summit and the ARF, as forums for bringing together all the country or major powers and other middle powers in the region. And that's where we were able to discuss issues, and ASEAN can facilitate discussions in trying to reach outcomes. So I think that's where the work of ASEAN lies, and also in strengthening the ASEAN community and in addressing new challenges such as health security, climate change. I mean, these are areas that ASEAN also has to look forward to, aside from, of course, other regional issues such as the tensions in the South China Sea.
Thank you. Yen?
Thank you, Ambassador. Secretary, good morning. Thank you very much for your speech. I agree with you very much that the United Nations has been very important in setting up rules of the road, encouraging restraint among major powers. This has especially been the case in the waning years, since the waning years of the Cold War. However, today we are possibly seeing a reintroduction of major power politics, of the sort of sense that right might makes right within the United Nations that could jam up the entire UN system, right? And under those conditions, what do you think the Philippines, and both by itself and in conjunction with its partners, intends to do to try to ensure that the UN keeps functioning?
Well, we have for many years been working with like-minded countries to ensure that the UN, at the very least, tries to live up to the principles of the UN Charter. And one of the points that we've been always stressing now, especially in the last couple of years, is to create greater awareness of the importance of international law and adherence to the rule of law and a rules-based order. Because that is without that, then we're certainly going to be in a very turbulent world where, as you said, might makes right, or each country can determine what is right. So we are trying to work on various areas on this, essentially in promoting of international law, greater awareness of its importance, in trying to work together for other countries, middle powers, for example, to speak up more on climate issues, climate change and health security, and as well as other areas that are within the purview of the United Nations. Now, it's a big challenge because at the moment, as you rightly say, for example, in the Security Council, there is a great division among the big powers, the permanent members, but it doesn't mean that the other countries cannot speak up and raise issues of equal importance. And there's so many issues that the world is confronted with, and we shouldn't try and lose sight of them. And that's where our strength perhaps lies, working with middle-income countries and other countries in our various concerns. So it's an uphill battle, but the whole key is to keep these issues alive and keep on stressing them, despite whatever problems we face now in the amongst the big powers.
Thank you very much, sir.
There's a question from table 29.
Yes, good morning. My name is Simon Song. I'm from Taiwan. My whole table are from Taiwan as well. Mr. Secretary, thank you and your president for expressing the concern and emphasize the importance of the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait several times. My question is, are you confident that in the Trump era, that China and U.S. will be able to sit down and to talk to each other and try to manage the disputes? And we are from this region, and we are devoting to peace and stability, and we hope that the major power can also settle down the issues and safeguard the peace and the stability. So are you confident that in the next few years that we can all work together to reach that goal, or do you see there are some turbulent times? Thank you.
Well, let me just say I hope that we can resolve whatever issues relate to the Taiwan Straits through peaceful means. That has always been the position of the Philippines and something we will maintain. We've always urged all the parties concerned to maintain regular, clear lines of communication to ensure that that whatever developments occur do not escalate into creating even more tension in the Straits, and that peaceful means should be used to try and resolve whatever differences pertain to the Taiwan Straits. Of course, the Philippines also is concerned that if anything should happen in Taiwan, certainly we would be, if anything beyond, let's say, if some conflict occurred, and certainly we hope not, we would be directly affected. The Philippines is only basically 70 nautical miles away from Taiwan, and we have hundreds of thousands of Filipinos living and working in Taiwan, so we would be directly affected. Hence, the importance we attach to the peaceful approach towards settling whatever differences relate to the Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits.
Are you happy with that answer?
I'm
okay,
happy.
yeah, right. You want to follow up? No. No. Okay. Any other question?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Prof. Chan, and thank you, Ambassador Secretary Manalo. My name is Ha. I'm from ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. As remarked by the introduction by Prof. Chan in her introduction, in 10 days' time, we will see the inauguration of the second Trump administration that adopts a very transactional approach to foreign policy, especially towards its allies. And the Philippines is a very steadfast ally of the US. And for Trump, I think he is very much eager to revisit all the terms of the alliance. And the key phrase is, but they must pay. So from Manila's point of view, what would be your hopes and concerns with regard to the Trump administration when it comes to the US-Philippines alliance? And how is Manila ready to embrace the second Trump administration? Thank you.
How much are you willing to pay?
Oh. Well, thank you. First, let me just say that we have worked before with President Trump in the first administration, and I think things went well. Secondly, we have a trade deficit with the United States. So I think maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a plus. So, you know, I think that's all speculation. We've not received any news along those lines that you mentioned. In fact, President Marcos and President Trump had a good discussion by phone, and they both reaffirmed the importance of our ties. And I think we'll be working on that basis. I think we are, with the US, we have a mutual defense treaty, which has been there for almost 80 years. And I think that's at least in the defense part, and there are plans for greater economic cooperation with the United States. So I think at this stage, that's the situation, and that's how it stands.
Yes.
Oh, another one.
Where? Oh, at the mic, sorry.
Okay.
Yes. Ooh, the
Hi,
lights are
I'm
blinding.
Siti Kamaria from the Hasana Foundation. So my question is, how can ASEAN countries enhance practical maritime cooperation and governance in the South China Sea, particularly in areas of environmental protection, sustainable resource management, and maritime security while navigating geopolitical tensions and overlapping territorial claims? And specifically, what concrete steps can be taken to strengthen existing regional mechanisms, develop joint environmental and fisheries initiatives? So there are a few islands in Malaysia and parts of Southeast Asia facing this issue, and also improve law enforcement coordination and engage constructively within the ASEAN waters to make sure that although there are complexities with regards to economic security, but environmental governance is still intact in these disputed waters. Thank you.
Well, I think that's quite a long list, but certainly I think very relevant. I think there's, as I mentioned in my statement, there's much potential that ASEAN can undertake, especially in terms of trying to address issues as maritime environmental concerns, even on terms of fisheries, creating maritime domain awareness. In fact, these are issues which there may not be at the moment any particular ASEAN's declarations, but certainly the Philippines will try and promote them in the coming year, and especially during our chairmanship in 2026. We would also like to create greater emphasis on how we can improve, or how ASEAN can contribute to better maritime governance and all its aspects in our region. So I think those are topics which we intend to address in more detail in the future.
Is there another question? I see.
One more, I think. Over there.
Yes. Right at the back. Yes.
Hi, good morning, Secretary. My name is Sharon Sia. I'm the coordinator of the ASEAN Studies Center and the Climate Change Program in ISEAS. I'm very heartened to hear that you put a lot of importance on climate change in your speech. Now, the Philippines is one of the world's most vulnerable to climate change, and every year we see that the Philippines suffers from great impacts due to changing climatic conditions. But yet, the Philippines has not declared a net zero pledge. So I'm very keen to hear from you, and in the lead up to the submission of the new national determined contributions in February, whether the Philippines has plans to do so. Thank you.
Well, we will certainly be very actively involved there. And we will, of course, be discussing with the other agencies involved for that particular question on the pledge, because there are a number of agencies in the Philippines which will be involved and participate in that. But just let me say, as you said, that the Philippines certainly is very much trying to be at the forefront on issues concerning climate action. And in fact, just last year, we were fortunate to have been awarded the headquarters of for the board of the Loss and Damage Fund. And we recently held a meeting in Manila just last December with the parties. And our hope is that once this Loss and Damage Fund can really get into action, we'll be able to really push for greater climate finance. And this is one area that we are really trying to focus on, because this is a great issue of concern to many countries, especially including the Philippines and other countries who are vulnerable to the natural disasters. So certainly, in fact, it's this administration under President Marcos, which is actually the first in the Philippines to put climate change and climate action among its priorities. So you can be assured that the Philippines will be playing an active role in all future climate action conferences. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, there's been a signal given to me that we've come to the end of the session. There's a gentleman there at the end of the room. I don't know if he's signaling to me to close or he's signaling to me that he wants to ask a question. Is there a question at the end of the room? Oh, there's a question in front. Can I just take one last question then? Okay,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hong Sen from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. I'd like to refer to your point that despite the efforts to promote ASEAN centrality, some other groupings should be given a chance in the region. The Philippines is probably the most minilateralist country in among the Southeast Asian countries. If all the emerging minilateralist groupings in this region have a common feature, that is, it has the Philippines as its members. So my question to you is, what do you see this role, the role of these minilateral groupings? Are they complementing or competing with ASEAN? Or if they are eroding ASEAN centrality, or maybe give ASEAN some healthy competition?
Well, I don't think the Philippines is unilateralist. We're simply exercising our options. We have an independent foreign policy. I think many countries in ASEAN have their own arrangements which do not necessarily involve all the other ASEAN countries. And simply, the point of this is we're simply trying to promote, as I think I mentioned earlier, issues such as economic resiliency, creating greater economic cooperation with other countries who are interested with cooperating with us. And we are open to cooperation with any country, but not at the expense of our existing commitments, especially to ASEAN. And I think, as I mentioned, arrangements which might occur in the future within our region should be supportive of ASEAN centrality. And that's what we're aiming for. But we're not precluding any other ASEAN country from entering into their own arrangements. And there are many which have been going on anyway. But ASEAN has still continued to thrive despite that. So I think whatever actions we take should be viewed in that context.
Well, I guess, well, that's your answer, yeah. We've come to the end of this first session, the opening session, And I think we have to thank Secretary Manalo for tabling the issues very squarely, giving us areas to look at and have some hope where we can collaborate towards resilience in this era of this time of turbulent changes. I would like to invite all of you to join me to thank Secretary Manalo for his presentation this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.